Hello, everyone, and welcome to Neurocracy. Today, we're joined by Dr. Dragana Rogulja, Associate Professor of Neurobiology at Harvard Medical School. Her lab investigates one of the oldest mysteries in biology, why sleep exists at all. Using fruit flies and mice, she and her team have uncovered how the brain shifts between sleep and wake, and even how severe sleep deprivation can trigger lethal effects via unexpected organs like the gut. Dr. Rogulja, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
So my first question for you is what first got you interested in studying sleep biology?
Probably the first thing would be the fact that I'm not a good sleeper. That got me kind of thinking about it, how it's pretty frustrating when you can't think. Um, and I'm generally interested in questions that are kind of simple that every human thinks about. And most of us have probably wondered at some point why you need to sleep,
Yeah.
at least when you're a kid and all curious about things. Um, so for me, this seemed like a really interesting question that doesn't have uh, or didn't have a known answer
Right.
to it. What could it be that really makes this behavior so vital to animal life? So yeah, I just thought it was interesting. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, perhaps the thing that really pushed me was when I was finishing grad school, I decided to sort of do to go into neuroscience. So as I mentioned to you before we started, I
Yeah.
my PhD was in developmental biology, and then I wanted to switch to neuroscience. And one of the questions that I found the most interesting, okay, is how awareness arises in the brain. How do you actually, from all the molecular and
Yeah.
electrical processes, in the end, you get the magic to emerge, and that
Yeah.
you actually form a concept of something that you can then act on in the world. And when you're asleep, you essentially lack that awareness, right? For the most part,
Right.
it's not like you're not dead, you're not really in a coma, you can reverse it quickly, but for the most part, the stimuli have to be that are going to get you to react and get you aroused have to be of sufficient intensity that they can cross a threshold which is elevated during sleep. So something you readily react when you're awake, but you can ignore a stimulus when you're asleep. How does that happen? We kind of take it for granted, but it's pretty crazy that you go into this state every night where you extinguish pretty much all awareness of the world. So I came, now that I'm thinking about it, I came to it from that perspective,
Yeah.
which is a little bit, elevated about the most sort of, uh, the most magical stuff about the brain. But
Yeah.
here we are in the end studying sleep, and we really turn to the body, actually, which neuroscientists often um, ignore. Not that we
Right.
turn to it, we discovered that really we should be paying attention to the body first.
Yeah. So could you explain a little bit about how you and your team study sleep, especially as it connects in terms of the body, like you mentioned?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we study many questions related to sleep, but one that we're gonna talk about now, I guess, is why, as I said, why is sleep important in the first
Yeah.
place? Why do you need to engage in this behavior? And so we use flies and mice, fruit flies and mice as our model system,
Yeah.
because we believe that fundamentally sleep, there is something universal about sleep in all animals. The
Right.
fact, again, that you get disconnected, for the most part, you stop moving, things like that. And when you're deprived of sleep, you really try to regain it. So, and obviously, those are much easier models to work on than with humans, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we try to uh, restrict sleep with different methodologies, such as activating certain neuronal populations or shaking animals without causing them physical harm. And then taking advantage of the fact that many labs have found mutants in genes that regulate sleep. And so we take those as well and we examine what happens. And we're trying to see things that are seen essentially irrespective of the method that you use to deprive sleep, and that we see both in flies and in mice when they're restricted from sleeping. And so our main approach is restrict animals of sleep to a certain degree, not prevent them from sleeping entirely, but restrict their sleep and then ask what happens. And you mentioned, and I mentioned the body. I mean, when we went into this, we didn't
Yeah.
really know where the answer might be. The only thing that we changed from the approach that most people were taking to up to that time was to look not just in the brain, but all over the body.
Yeah.
And it's generally when we talk about sleep, the brain is the organ that we mostly focus on, and that's
Yeah.
for many good reasons. The fact that um, you do use your brain to fall
Yeah.
asleep, and you feel really bad when you don't sleep. All of these things.
Yeah.
You dream using your brain, etc. But that can't be the answer, the ultimate answer
Right.
for why, in my opinion, for why sleep arose in the first place, because the animals which slept did not have a brain. At least, that's what we think today. The first animals that appeared in the evolution that didn't have a brain, they had simple nervous systems, but they slept. They still exhibited this behavior.
Wow.
And if that is true, then trying to understand why sleep is essential for survival in the first place should include other parts of the body and not just the
Yeah,
brain.
for sure.
So basically, that was our approach. We looked, and specifically, this was a project started by Alex Vaccaro, postdoc in my lab. Alex deprived flies of sleep or restricted them in how much they sleep, and then she looked all over the body for signs of cellular damage, any
Okay.
kind of cellular damage that she could think of, markers. And the idea was okay, so if the animals die prematurely when they're restricted from sleeping, which they do, then can we find the underlying cause of that lethality? And she found that the gut is an organ that seems particularly vulnerable to
Yeah.
sleep loss. And we saw that when flies and mice are restricted in how much they sleep, they accumulate reactive oxygen species in their gut, which can cause
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah. So
So that's
this is
basically
actually you kind of answered this question a little bit, but it kind of came up to me earlier in the beginning of this discussion. So do you have any idea of when or like in kind of like the evolutionary timeline of the development of humans that sleep may have arose? Because I was just thinking about it for the past couple of minutes, like
Mhm.
from the cell to like where we are today. Obviously it's a long evolutionary timeline, and I have spent some time like studying like fossils and evolutionary development. So this is something actually interesting that I'm surprised I've never thought of. But what is your
Mm.
kind of answer to this interesting question?
So I'll answer based on work from other people. So people
Okay.
have looked and
Yeah.
have found that animals such as jellyfish or hydra that are very, early, um, have formed much earlier than humans,
Yeah.
do sleep. And there's certain animals that people refer to as the living fossils because they haven't
Yeah.
changed much.
Yeah.
And then those animals also
Yeah.
engage in this behavior today, where they
Yeah.
swim from the bottom of the ocean, swim to the surface or close to the surface, feed, and then fall down,
Yeah.
literally float down, fall asleep. So this happens every day. So we think that really, as far as we can tell, pretty close timing. As soon as there were animals, they were engaging in some forms of sleep.
Interesting.
And so, you can think of sleep again as something for memory consolidation, all of
Yeah.
that. I want to stress that I do not think that sleep is all about the gut and all for the gut. Okay.
Right. Right.
So we're trying
Yeah.
to understand what like that basic requirement is, physiological requirement. We think that all of these wonderful things that sleep does today, like helping you think and remember things, are true, but they did developed as the brain developed,
Right.
evolved, and became more complex.
Yeah.
Um, but based on everything that we see now, we think that essentially our take, sort of overarching thing, like how we think about it, is that sleep is a state during which you have to stop moving, during which your body relaxes, like it never relaxes when you're awake. Okay, when you can, completely just let go, right? So now we're um, sitting here talking, not moving, but I'm still, putting some effort into holding my body up and like defying gravity, right?
Yeah.
But later when I'm asleep, I'm just gonna be completely, like a rag. And that
Right.
must do something to your body, right? The way that it can function, the way that your blood flows, the way that your
Yeah.
digestion works, etc. So we think that it's really about that.
Yeah.
And what we see now in work that we're just preparing to submit for publication is that digestion really doesn't work properly when you don't sleep. So we think that
Mm.
that might be um, might be one of the reasons, primary reasons why you sleep. And that's where the factor of stress comes in. And
Yeah.
if you want to
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I did have one thing to add though.
oh,
So,
sorry, yeah.
I've actually been reading this book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker from
Mhm,
UC
mhm.
Berkeley, and in one of the first chapters, he's like kind of like talks about why we sleep in terms of how it's not really a question of sometimes like what benefits does sleep have, but rather what sleep doesn't benefit. So, does that kind of like
What
connect?
sleep doesn't benefit, you were saying?
Or like parts of the body, like it's difficult to find parts of the body that aren't
Right, right,
benefiting
right, 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 right. Of
by sleep.
course. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
In a
yeah.
way, it is like saying, okay, what is wakefulness good
Right.
for?
Yeah.
It's good for many things. I 100% agree with that. And
Yeah.
biology is economical. I mean, you're not going to have this like huge system spend all this time not moving and
Yeah.
then not
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
for many
Yeah.
different things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
100%. I mean, there's so many interesting ways to think about it. I used to think, you know, I mean, it's a pretty common thought, like sleep is dangerous, kind of you're unprotected during that time. It seems like you're wasting time, you're not doing anything productive. But actually, it can really be a time when you can hide from animals that are trying to
Yeah.
hunt you. And, it
Yeah.
could actually be worse going around looking for food.
Right.
So now, things we start seeing things that make sense. In another study, where we also were starting from the nervous system, we're trying to understand how this threshold for sensory arousal actually gets elevated during sleep. We stumbled upon a mechanism which originates in the gut and then acts towards the brain to help the animal essentially disconnect to a greater degree, depending on the kind of food that you eat. So if you have more dietary proteins in the food, you disconnect more. And
Uh,
again, that can make sense. Right now, you
yeah.
can just go chill behind some rock, hide from predators instead of going and eating, right? And you can disconnect more so that you're not smelling food, if you're not hungry and so on. So now to start kind of like try to tie it together, we are essentially thinking that wakefulness is a state of stress, that it's kind of a
Oh yeah.
state of fight or flight always to a greater or lesser degree because I always think even like experiences like this, which are really nice and fun, it's still a form of stress, right? It's something that kind of pushes you out of your homeostatic point, so to speak. And the wakefulness is full of experiences which are agitating your system in a way,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And so when that happens, the digestive system doesn't work properly. We know that when the sympathetic tone is high, which again, I think that's what wakefulness is. It's more of that thing. Then your body's not able to perform certain physiological functions as well as it does when you switch to the more parasympathetic
Right.
and rest and digest mode,
Yeah.
which is kind of like, okay, we rediscovered that. But
Right.
I think that really roughly that's what sleep and wakefulness are primarily about.
Yeah. So, I also wanted to ask about how, so I know you use fruit flies and mice a lot. And is there any like kind of connection that these are like difficult to translate to humans, or is there kind of like some sort of bridge, or how does that work? Like connecting
It's
this
not
to
that difficult. It's really
Okay.
not that difficult,
Yeah.
honestly. And maybe I'm lucky in a sense that I have that mentality where I never saw or that kind of mindset where I really do fully believe that working with these systems will get us to things that are applicable to humans because during development essentially the same programs are used, in flies and in us. So there were all these Nobel Prizes for discoveries made in flies, which essentially turned out to be applying to us. How the whole body develops head to toe, right? That's come from screening in flies, your innate immunity, how the genes are organized in the chromosome, the circadian clock. So people from those fields, where I did my training, both during my PhD and postdoctoral training, it was in fields where mammalian people really looked up to flies for answers and discoveries and suggestions for how to go forward.
Yeah.
And it turns out with sleep, we do see some differences, but fundamentally, for the kinds of things that I'm interested in,
Yeah.
where we see parallels everywhere we look.
Yeah.
And
That's
it makes,
interesting.
sorry to cut
No,
you off.
yeah.
I have one person in the lab who, and she's really loves working with flies. And she's like, I'm not even interested in looking at mice. But then when she actually was able to see that what she saw in flies, the same thing was true in mice,
Uh,
she was like,
that
oh,
must have been
yeah,
really
this is
satisfying to
really
see.
exciting. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah, that must be
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
exactly.
So,
So we try to do that, make
yeah,
first discovery in flies and then check in mice for the
yeah.
most.
That makes sense. So, I know you mentioned this earlier, the idea of how, or the question of how lack of sleep affects like decision making and stress. So, if you don't mind here, I have a little skit I'm gonna do here so that we can kind of I know I mentioned this before the interview, but I'm gonna bring my what I'm gonna wear and then
Sure,
I'll kind
yeah.
of explain it to the viewers too a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. This is the first time I'm doing something like this in an
Are you
interview.
editing this part out or you're gonna
No, I think
leave
I might keep it actually. I think it'll
keep
be
the whole
fun,
thing?
fun
Cool.
to watch.
No, I
Yeah.
don't mean I mean this part, the prepping part.
No, yeah, yeah, I think I might keep
Yeah,
this. They
okay,
can see me
cool.
getting ready.
All
But
right, all right.
yeah,
Keeping it honest. I like that. You
yeah,
have that scientific mentality.
yeah. Button this up. This is actually from my school. We have like a little medical like course program. So
I see. You
just
have
role
your
playing as a sleep medicine physician here.
okay.
Okay, let's just this. I think this should be good. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Neurocracy after a minor interruption. Today, we're joined by Dr. Dragana Rogulja from Harvard Medical School, who's an associate professor of neurobiology there, and she is an expert on sleep. And specifically, she is able to help us with the question of how characters in the Hunger Games, such as Katniss, who struggle with managing sleep, risk taking, and decision making. And I wanted to ask her a question that I had from someone from the Hunger Games about how players should manage their sleep or maybe be aware of how their lack of sleep might affect their behaviors through the game and being able to make decisions when their lives are at stake.
Okay, so I want to correct you in something that you said. You called
Okay.
me a sleep expert, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
I don't really. I'm not that. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that. I'm sure that
Yeah.
everyone is. There are people who are experts in certain things, in managing
Yeah.
sleep disorders in humans, whatever. But I would not call my. I don't know. There's so many things that I
You're
don't
right.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah.
Now the thing that I could say. Whew, what are you looking for? Like practical advice for how to do it more, what to be aware. Well, I'll
Well,
say one thing that, okay, maybe this is good to be aware of is that your need for sleep can be separated from your feeling of sleepiness, which is something that people don't necessarily get. That is, people can say, I'm fine with 4 hours of sleep. Some people are fine with that. Most people are probably not going to be fine with that.
yeah.
And people that think that they're fine, they find a way to kind of battle through not sleeping. You can take some coffee, energy drink, blah, blah, blah. You kind of make it through the day. You're like, all right, I'm fine. I survived. I'm good. That doesn't mean that what your body is registering from that sleep loss is not there. It doesn't mean that your body's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
And that is because the feeling of sleepiness is a trick that your nervous
Yeah.
system is playing on you to
Yeah.
get you to do something, right? It just generates, you have to somehow, how would you otherwise go into this? Oh, yeah, I'm just randomly going to go lay down, stop moving, and just,
Yeah.
like, how would you would never do that. So you
Yeah.
have to feel sleepy.
Right.
But you can fool the feeling of sleepiness. You can't fool the need for sleep. So the same way that killing hunger would not mean that you don't need to eat.
Right.
So I would say for players just to keep that in mind,
Mm.
that would be a good thing. That even when you think that you're okay, you might not be, and your performance might benefit from sleeping more, even when you think that your time could be spent better doing something else.
Yeah. And this kind of connects with an idea I've had, or that come up in a couple recent interviews, where people often perceive themselves as completely fine when in fact they're severely sleep deprived.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um,
exactly.
I
You're so
actually
sleep
wondered,
deprived that you don't even function well in recognizing how you're
yeah,
feeling.
that's a funny way of putting it. So this question just actually came to my mind. Do animals ever face sleep deprivation, or is there any like reason or kind of way that animals
Yeah.
could get to this
So
state? And I'll take this
get
off for now, but
no, no, sorry. Okay.
yeah.
That animals can get to what state?
Like a state of being sleep
Like
deprived.
that naturally happens.
Yeah, yeah, like in a natural way.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. I
curious.
mean,
Yeah.
when you have a baby, for example, that's like one state where when parents are extremely sleep deprived. I mean,
Oh yeah.
animals,
That
right?
is interesting. Yeah.
That definitely happens, and that's a time where a sleep aid would not help you because it's not that you wouldn't be able to sleep; it's just that you can't afford to sleep. But
Yeah.
there's some I don't know if this is true or not, but there's some evidence that certain aquatic animals, after they have a calf, like dolphins, that they don't sleep. The mom and the baby don't sleep for a while, or they sleep very
Interesting.
little,
Yeah.
for a little bit. Um, and then there's also some evidence just from looking at some things casually. I'm not sure if this is true, but those um, kinds of animals may have more genes that code for antioxidant proteins, maybe so that you could in the gut mitigate this damage that we saw happens when animals don't sleep.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
But this is like, I'm not like signing my name to
Right.
these.
Yeah, yeah, I
It's
understand.
potentially interesting.
Yeah, it's just a question that popped in my head, so I had to ask.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So no, but it is like, it must be like when you're migrating, right? Like
right, yeah.
animals can suppress sleep for a while. Again, when you're tending to like your
Yeah.
offspring, I mean, in humans too, when they take care of old parents, whatever, work, kids, all of those
And
things. Yeah.
and I think it's funny, you specifically asked me or clarified that I was asking about natural sleep
Uh,
deprivation, but that begs the question, what about artificial sleep deprivation, especially with humans, right? Like invading with animal like habitats. I'm
mhm,
curious, like for example, does light pollution affect animals? Do animals actually I have to ask a clarifying question here. Do
mhm.
other animals use light as an entraining factor for their circadian
Well,
rhythm?
yeah, I mean, there's all these things like I don't know if you saw, there's some, it's pretty sad, but there's these turtles, I guess, that normally they navigate out of the water like baby turtles
Yeah,
that
yeah.
navigate out of the water like by moonlight, but then they actually are drawn to the shore just by lights that are artificial.
Oh, I
So they
see what you mean.
come, too
Yeah.
early and things like that. So for
Yeah.
sure, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's
Okay.
impossible not to, right? Like when you look at what Earth looks like from space
Yeah.
during nighttime, right? It's pretty
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, how
Yeah.
much is glowing. So yeah, totally. Um, but actually, while you were talking, I had another point. Let me try to think what it was oh yeah,
Yeah.
actually, if I can make this point.
Yeah.
So what I would like to say also is that what we think actually is that this raw or this oxidation, reactive oxygen species, ROS, or oxidation response that happens in the gut, we actually think that that might be a protective mechanism at first that then goes bad. Okay,
Interesting.
so this is also something that's good to think about for people, especially who take antioxidants. Okay, so antioxidants can mean like, oh, they're amazing, and they can even we could see that they could prevent animals from dying when they're sleep deprived, but they're not a miracle when you don't need them, and they can actually be harmful, and that is because reactive oxygen species. This is something that I didn't know before we started working on this, but I think now it's really, really interesting. Reactive oxygen species, these things that can cause damage in the gut
Yeah.
when you sleep, can actually be signaling molecules that have protective roles. And
Oh.
especially in the gut, so most of us you make inside the mitochondria during
Yeah.
energy production,
Yeah.
and you quickly neutralize them,
Right.
and they can cause a lot of damage. But they're cellular systems which actually may cross on purpose in order to do things such as in the gut to stimulate cell proliferation. So actually you require ROS. If you take too much antioxidants, it's really not good. And the gut, you can imagine, I mean, you probably know, you don't have to imagine that it's an organ that's different from others because it's exposed to all kinds of
Yeah.
toxic substances all the
Oh yeah.
time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need to turn over regularly. every few days. You need to actually make it, which is not something that's happening in your brain or anywhere else in the body. There's some places where, body regenerates, but not like that, like in the gut. And these reactive oxygen species that are induced when animals are not sleeping, we think that they might be induced in order to help you make new cells. Because if you remember, I tell you that absorption of nutrients is compromised when you don't
Yeah.
sleep. That's this new work that we haven't published yet. Um, it's compromised, and we see actually the genes that are required for nutrient absorption are repressed. So what if your body is now trying to make low levels of reactive oxygen species in order to stimulate your gut to
Yeah.
proliferate and make new cells, which would be better
Right.
at absorbing things? And so
That's
then if you were to fall asleep, you would be fine. But because you keep staying awake, or when
mm.
you keep staying awake, then that goes into this bad regimen. So that's kind of actually how we're thinking
Yeah,
about it.
that's an interesting nuance actually. I
Yeah,
never actually knew that reactive oxygen species could be like beneficial in a
I
way.
didn't
Like,
either. I didn't
yeah,
either. But
yeah,
it's really interesting, and it could explain a lot of things. If you look at research that tests antioxidants, there's a lot of mixed results. Sometimes they really do seem
interesting.
amazing, and sometimes people say they don't do anything, or they can even be harmful.
Right.
So that's really interesting, and it also is interesting then to think about this idea of hormesis, which is that low level of stress is actually good for you. High stress is
Right.
bad.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
low level of stress is good because it makes you
yeah,
adapt. It makes you think of like some alternative
yeah,
strategies that could maybe put things on ice, until
yeah,
conditions are better and things like that. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah. So I know we've been talking about this idea of how like the gut is related to sleep deprivation and some of the consequences associated with that. But what would you say, from your point of view, is the single biggest, and you can kind of be subjective with this,
Mhm.
underestimated consequence of chronic poor sleep or chronic sleep deprivation in humans that maybe listeners don't know about,
Well, that researchers don't know about, you
or
mean
that
something
the listeners don't know about?
the listeners don't know
Yeah,
about?
yeah. So maybe
Well,
something like the general public isn't like aware of.
I would say in general the public is not aware of how bad losing sleep is. And I think that that's something, because some of these things that we're now uncovering are not things that are obvious. You can't see them maybe
Yeah,
from the side. You can
yeah,
feel, you can tell that you're feeling sleepy or whatever. But like I said, there's ways to fool that. But that's the problem, is that this can fool you as well into
yeah,
thinking that you're okay
yeah,
when you're not. So that's really the biggest issue. And I would say, like you said, you had another guest who said basically it's hard to find anything that's not connected to sleep. And it's true that the body really suffers. I mean, we start seeing now like kidney problems.
yeah,
There's all kinds of issues that do occur, circulation changes, diabetes, all
yeah,
kinds of issues when you don't sleep. So it's something, I mean, I'm really sympathetic, because I myself, even though I know all these things, it's still like so hard sometimes to make yourself go to sleep. It really
yeah,
seems like if you can just kind of like make it through, you'll be okay. But
yeah.
I'm afraid to say it really does seem like there's bad things that happen in the body when you don't sleep.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I do these interviews all the time, and sometimes like I feel like I'm going against the very like things that I talk to people about and some of the
I
advice
know.
that they give.
Tell
So
me about it.
yeah.
I do too. You're young. Okay, this is the problem, is like you're young, you can still do all these things and it's fine. When you get, no, seriously, like you're just
Yeah.
buffered better. That's
Yeah.
it. Like you're
Yeah.
buffered better. You're like, you can get away with things. As you
Yeah.
get older, it's really harder to stay at that optimal point, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's something that you have to deal with.
Yeah. And I guess I always like to end these interviews with a futuristic note. So looking toward the future, what developments or potential like new things that are coming up in sleep research excite you the most?
Well, I'm excited about this. It seems to me that people have started now moving away from this idea. I hope so. I hope moving away from this idea that sleep is all about the brain. So
Okay. Yeah.
there is um, there is a saying that sleep is of the brain, by the brain, for the brain. That was coined by someone actually who was here.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
is no longer alive, and that's something, it's like papers written about that, and really people believed in this idea that sleep is all about memory and whatever. And um I want to believe that that's changing and that we're actually looking inside the body. I
Yeah.
mean, I can see that it is. I see,
Right.
that it is based on what people are starting to do now, and I'm
Yeah.
happy about that.
Yeah.
Because again, I think ultimately we have to face the fact that so many diseases are clinically related to poor
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah. 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 One
There's
of
no
the
way to reconcile that just with like memory related processes or something like
yeah, yeah. In the future, one of the things that I want to do is maybe get into like research, like relating to like these diseases and how they relate to
that.
like chronic sleep deprivation. And one of the
Hmm.
things I also talk a lot about on this podcast is high school start times and how like and
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
and
100%.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think did you mention you have a child who's my
I have a
age?
son who's your
Yeah,
age. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So I mean,
Thank you
you've
for
probably
allergy.
seen it as a
I
parent.
know.
Yeah,
SAT tests like scheduled for 8 in the morning. You
mine
don't know
starts at 7:30 actually, but yeah,
7:30. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes no sense.
I know.
Why? This is, and it really is. Okay, so you worked in this field, you know that when you're a teenager, your clock really does
Yeah.
uh
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
change. Did you have Till Ronenberg? I hope I'm not mispronouncing his
Yes.
name. Did you get in
Yes.
touch with him? So he does a lot of this. He's in Germany.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think I interviewed him, but I've reached out to that name.
He's great. He's really
Yeah.
cool. Like he
Yeah.
does a lot of this kind of looking into in humans, like what
Yeah.
are really the natural rhythms, and he sees that in teenagers
Yeah.
it really does change. So I'm totally with you
Yeah.
that it should
And
be
I
reversed.
think it's one of the things that will be changing hopefully in the next couple years or decade, however long it takes. I think it's something very important.
I hope
And
so. I
um
hope
I,
so.
yeah, yeah, I think we'll start to see like the effects, especially as it comes out. Like I think it's one of those things where, as we mentioned, like it's not always like visible on the surface, which is why sometimes people like just say, oh, it's just science, it's always changing. But I think that it's important
No,
to
this is pretty
like
well established. I
yeah,
totally
yeah.
so. Also moving the clock, twice a
Oh
year,
yeah, that's the
that's
other thing
great.
too.
Like the
Yeah. And I know
yeah.
that just happened very recently
And
too.
yeah, everybody's like sluggish, for a
Yeah,
week, and
you
it's
you
just
can
like
see it. Yeah.
you can see it for
Yeah.
sure. So I would say those are the things that maybe we can impact one day to not do, because that's something
Yeah.
that a lot of people agree on, that it's really not great for you.
Yeah. So on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a really fun conversation. Thank you for letting me do my skit with you. That was
Thank
fun.
you so
But
much. I mean,
yeah.
you're great. It's so exciting to talk to someone,
Yeah.
that young and
Yeah.
like so into science and cool. I
Yeah.
love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.